Feathers drift over a blood-soaked battlefield. A knight contemplates the price of loyalty. Loyalty ends in a fatal, bloody streak. The brown-haired man pours liquid, venting his frustrations with his entitled employers. He resignedly finishes pouring his drink, questioning what else he can do. A mercenary's life consumes his last flask as he tosses it into the flames. Looking out over the burning horizon, he notes that all nobles are exactly the same. He explains how nobles lure mercenaries with promises of land and titles only to change their stories with creative lies once the danger passes. He confronts a noble with cynicism, suggesting that his latest request is the most absurd one yet. The mercenary captain Jake stares down the red-haired commander standing far below.
The red-haired commander stands firm and silent beneath the darkening sky.
The commander coldly repeats his order, explicitly telling Jake to face his death. Jake asks if the commander has forgotten his identity, but the man confirms he knows him as the captain of the Fang mercenaries. Jake laughs off the command, mocking the noble for having an unexpected and dark sense of humor. He begins to draw his blade, questioning why anyone would order a common mercenary to perform such a task. Jake finds the idea of a mercenary dying for the honor of a knight completely ridiculous. The red-haired commander closes his eyes, admitting he spoke too soon. The commander apologizes for the misunderstanding, leading Jake to wonder what he actually meant. He clarifies that he simply wants to entrust Jake with a final, desperate mission. Looking over the burning city, the commander acknowledges that their repeated defeats have finally sealed their fate. He explains that the rebels are now at the throat of the Crawford family, the land's traditional guardians. The commander admits his desperation led him to ramble about their dire situation as the castle burns. Jake dismisses the explanation with a gesture, claiming he fully understands given their current mess. He acknowledges the grim reality of the cornered situation they're on. Jake decides it is time to leave, noting the commander was a decent noble but cornered despite his great talent. Jake wonders if the mission is just a simple scout task for a retreat before his final pay. The commander reveals the mission is to hold off an all-out rebel offensive coming tomorrow. Embers drift through the air as the sun sets over the ruined castle. He adds that Jake only needs to hold the line until he himself falls in battle. The commander offers a massive, glowing red gem to settle their financial balance. He explains the gem's immense value, but Jake suddenly slaps the treasure away with a sharp clack sounding. The stunned commander asks what Jake is doing, only for the mercenary to retort that it is his line to ask. Jake's smile turns predatory as he asks if his friendly demeanor was mistaken for complete stupidity. He points out that the orders are essentially telling his men to become useless meat shields. Jake accuses him of throwing the mercenaries away just to buy a few seconds for his master to escape. He notes that the enemy will show no mercy to them regardless of their choices. The commander stands silent as Jake confronts him on the rooftop. The noble argues the enemy only wants him and will not bother chasing mere mercenaries once he is dead. Jake sarcastically shouts "right" while noting that is how things usually work in their business. He challenges the commander on the truth, asking if he knows what the enemy really thinks of them. Jake reveals that the rebels view his mercenary corps as sworn enemies to be torn limb from limb. The commander leads his knights through the dark woods as an injured soldier's cough echoes.
A knight rushes forward to assist his fallen comrade propped against a tree.
He reaches out to help the soldier, unaware of the hidden danger. A sudden, violent spray of blood erupts as the knight is ambushed from the shadows. The surrounding knights watch in frozen horror as their companion is struck down. Red eyes gleam through a bloodied helmet as the mercenary captain realizes it is a trap. Pure chaos ensues as swords clash and men fall in the dark, suffocating forest. The mounted noble realizes with fury that the enemy disguised themselves as dead soldiers. He shouts in outrage, questioning if the mercenaries know anything of honor. A sudden, violent spray of blood erupts with a sharp slash sounding. A powerful impact sends a figure hurtling through the air. A head falls to the dirt with a heavy thud sounding. Jake reflects on the countless lives he has taken as a mercenary captain. He notes that his cold pragmatism is the only reason they have survived. Jake warns the commander that the enemy is eager to slaughter them. He questions if the commander truly intended to use his men as bait. The commander vows to take command himself with a thunderous blast sounding. Jake leaps back from the noble's aggression with a quick dash sounding. He mocks the noble for being the worst trash he has ever met. Jake suggests that taking the noble's head would satisfy the rebels. The commander asks if Jake intends to beg, but the captain remains firm. Jake acknowledges that the noble has carefully prepared a trap for them. He declares his duty to sacrifice his own head along with the noble's. He hopes the sacrifice of 2 leaders will allow his men to go free. The commander is stunned that Jake would offer his own life. Jake clarifies his resolve to save his subordinates through his death. He admits that he led his men based on his own selfish whims. Jake accepts full responsibility for those who followed him into the gutter. The captain stands defiant, prepared for his final moment of leadership. The red-haired commander stares in shock at the captain's unexpected honor. The noble begrudgingly agrees with Jake's assessment of the situation. He expresses regret for the waste of potential as he prepares to strike. A deadly intent settles over the commander's face. A blindingly fast sword strike cuts through the air. Jake shouts in a final, desperate burst of energy. The commander stands over his opponent as the duel reaches its end. A sharp, final cutting sound echoes through the silence. Jake realizes the massive power gap between him and the noble. He falls to the ground, lamenting the noble's overwhelming tie. The commander walks away from the captain's dying form. Jake finds peace in his decision to save his men. His consciousness dissolves into a swirling, dark abyss. He suddenly awakens with a quick, rhythmic blink sounder. He finds himself in a grand room with an orange-haired servant boy. He struggles to find his voice, whispering to the stranger. He slowly raises a hand to his unfamiliar face. The servant boy delivers a stinging slap, sounding to wake him. A small trail of steam rises with a faint hiss sounding. The boy tearfully begs the young master to pull himself together. The blonde youth stares in bewilderment at his new reality. He sits up in an ornate bed while the boy sobs nearby. He realizes that something is terribly wrong with his situation. He searches his memory, wondering what happened to his battle-worn body. He notices his new hands are soft and smell like fresh grass. He watches as the servant boy wails at the top of his lungs. He is confused by the boy's erratic behavior and constant crime. The servant expresses his relief that the young master survived. He confesses his fear of being executed if the master had died.
The blonde youth realizes these concerns have nothing to do with his past.
Reflection on an unsavable past Beth. Shock at the sudden awakening. He frantically checks his neck, questioning if his head is still attached. Silence fills the room as he sits in a grand bed before his servant. He realizes there is only one logical conclusion to his current state. Stepping onto the floor with a soft rustle sounding, he confirms he has inhabited a stranger's body.
He is startled to find himself possessing an incredibly handsome face.
The blonde youth stares into the mirror while his servant waits patiently nearby. He notes the powerful aura of nobility radiating from his new reflection. Household reeks on money. He realizes he needs to gather information, starting with his own identity. Turning to the servant Hans, he asks for a moment of his time. Hans suggests his master might still be confused from the lingering malignant energy. A look of intense realization crosses the blonde youth's face. He discovers he has been sent 15 years into the past. He decides to stop being surprised and focus on the tasks ahead. With a sharpened gaze, he prepares to ask his next crucial question. Hans is visibly shaken when the master asks if he has a death wish today. He demands to know why a mere servant would touch his master without leave. He questions if the laws have changed, demanding Hans answer him immediately. He stares Hans down, demanding to know exactly who he's supposed to be in. Hans bows in terror with a heavy thud sounding, begging for forgiveness for his perceived rudeness. Hans identifies him as Lucien Valdec, the third son of the prestigious House Valdec. Lucien processes the weight of his new family name. Lion crest flag ripples in wind. Massive, ornate exterior of the estate.
Narration establishes the Valdecs as the closest aides to the emperor himself.
The family is revealed to hold power rivaling that of the imperial bloodline. Guards stand watch at the towering entrance of the Grand Palace. Lucien reflects that he initially expected to return to his old job as a mercenary. He is stunned to find himself reborn as a high-ranking noble.
He recalls the bitterness of his past life serving entitled aristocrats for coin.
Lone figure in a rain-slicked graveyard. His past self drinks from a flask, pondering this sudden, incredible opportunity. He wonders how high he could have risen with these advantages in his first life. He accepts this new destiny as the images of his two lives merge and shatter. Lucien throws the windows open with a sharp clack sounding to welcome the dawn. A confident smile plays on his lips as he faces his future. Glistening marble domes of the palace. Walking through the halls, Lucien compares the splendor to his travels as a mercenary. He concludes that the magnificence of this estate is truly unparalleled. He determines that he must adapt to this high-class environment immediately. Lucien casts a sidelong glance at the maids whispering in holler. The servants gossip about how long the young master has been in seclusion. He senses that the way the staff looks at him is far from normal.
The surrounding servants loom in the shadows with an eerie silence sounding.
Lucien continues his walk, feeling the weight of the house's peculiar atmosphere. He recalls the previous Lucien spending over a year cooped up in despair. He questions why someone with everything would choose to hide away in a corner.
He admits that while noble mindsets are strange, his predecessor's behavior was extreme.
Narration introduces the blonde youth as Lucien Valdec, son of the Empire's protector, Grand Duke Sigmund. Lucien sits in bed while a massive, ghostly image of his father looms over him, making him question his next move. Watching the worried orange-haired servant boy, Lucien wonders if his predecessor was simply a neglected problem child. As he stands in the hallway, the sudden, heavy clack sounding of a boot hitting the floor interrupts his thoughts of avoidance. Lucien and the servant turn in shock as a calm voice confirms that the report of the young master's recovery was accurate. A refined man with gray hair and sharp green eyes offers a polite, knowing smile.
Hans responds with a quick, respectful duck, sounding as the gentleman asks if Lucien feels any physical discomfort.
The man is identified as head butler Edwin, a former hostage who rose to manage all family affairs through pure talent. Edwin is further revealed to be the right-hand man and closest confidant of Grand Duke Sigmund. Lucian panics internally, realizing that a man this perceptive is the one most likely to notice his change in personality. He lets out a soft, nervous gulp sounding, while hoping the butler's year-long absence from his side will protect his secret. Lucian reflects on the red-haired commander he once knew, the person he considered the embodiment of true nobility. Putting on a dazzling, flower-filled smile, Lucian graciously credits Edwin with helping his significant recovery. He smoothly claims he has come out to finally handle the family affairs he neglected during his long seclusion. Lucian probes for information, asking the butler if any major incidents have occurred within the family recently. Edwin smiles warmly, assuring the young master that the family is well and expressing relief at his master's seemingly unchanged nature. Lucian laughs off his worries, noting that the butler does not seem to find his behavior suspicious at all. Feeling victorious, he waves goodbye and prepares to leave with a quick, confident swish sounding. The butler's expression shifts as he politely asks the young master to wait for just a moment. Lucian comes to a sharp, sudden halt, sounding as Edwin requests that he delay his return to his chambers. A chill runs down Lucian's spine as the butler reveals that the Grand Duke wishes for an immediate audience. Lucian stands small and vulnerable in a cavernous, sun-drenched office before the intimidating figure of his father. A heavy, oppressive silence fills the room as Grand Duke Sigmund stares from the shadows of his massive desk. The tension between father and son is palpable as they face each other in the silent study. The Grand Duke finally speaks, addressing his son by his full name with a cold, formal tone. Lucian breaks into a cold sweat, paralyzed by the overwhelming pressure radiating from the man across the room. Sigmund leans forward with a predatory gaze, demanding to know the reason why Lucian is still alive.
A promotional assembly features the main cast of characters against a dark, crystalline background.
The Grand Duke's golden eyes pierce through the gloom as he repeats his chilling question about his son's survival. A deep, echoing silence sounding remains the only response in the vast office as the confrontation continues. Lucian is completely blindsided, stammering in confusion as he struggles to grasp the intent behind his father's words. Sigmund's expression remains grim as he admits that he originally intended to overlook his son's recent actions. Recalling a portrait of Lucian's mother, the Duke accuses him of using her death as a shield for his cowardice. His hand grips the desk with a sharp, strained creak sounding as he scolds Lucian for his year of self-imposed isolation. The father looms over his son, furious that Lucian would treat his own life so lightly by attempting to harm himself. Lucian is struck by a wave of shock as the true nature of the original Lucian's accident is revealed. He flashes back to Hans's excessive crying, finally understanding the boy's terror was based on a suicide attempt. Sigmund demands that Lucian stop hiding behind excuses and finally confess the truth he has been harboring. Lucian stands silently with his back to the viewer, absorbing the weight of his father's harsh judgment.
His golden eyes reflect a new, hardened resolve as he processes the dark history of the body he now inhabits.
A look of grim realization crosses his face as he understands why he locked specific memories of this host's past. Outside the grand doors, the hushed whispers of the household staff create a low, buzzing murmur sounding.
A somber image of a figure lying in state confirms the tragic end of a life.
The portrait of Grand Duke Sigmund stands as a reminder of the harsh patriarch's absolute authority over his house. A map outlines the family tree, showing that Sigmund's 4 sons were all born to different mothers. Lucian's past self stands in a void of memory, realizing he has no connection to this boy or his deceased mother. The flowers surrounding the coffin represent the cold, empty ceremony of a noble's passing.
The finality of the situation is punctuated by a heavy, resonant thud sounding as a lid is closed.
Lucian stares directly at his father, ready to face whatever consequences this identity brings. He reflects on the immense psychological burden that drove the young boy to such a desperate, lonely end. Lucian realizes the original boy was desperately seeking even a shred of his father's attention. Prolonged isolation left the boy's body too weak to survive the effects of his suicide attempt. The fatal white pills slip from his hand with a soft clatter sounding. Lucian reflects that his father's harshness is actually a logical reaction to his predecessor's behavior. He decides that whether he is a Grand Duke or not, his father's cold response is understandable. Grand Duke Sigmund remains a stoic and imposing figure behind his massive desk. Lucian lets out a nervous gulp sounding while suppressing his empathy for the original boy's plight. He panics at the thought of his own future being on the verge of disaster. A sharp crack sounding marks the literal fracturing of the floor beneath his feet. He fears that even one wrong word will shatter his chance at this new life. He imagines being discarded into a remote monastery to live as a priest forever. Or perhaps being exiled to the frozen north among shadows and beasts.
He envisions a miserable life fleeing giant bears in the snow, worth less than rags.
A sharp, cunning look enters his eyes as he refuses to let this family drama ruin him. He prepares to answer his father with newfound confidence and gravity. Lucian performs a perfect, graceful bow with a polite rustle sounding. He takes full responsibility for his past actions and accepts any punishment his father gives. Sigmund pauses with a thoughtful stroke sounding of his golden beard.
The Grand Duke looks intensely at his son, noting the unexpected change in his demeanor.
Sigmund is momentarily speechless when Lucian suggests he should rejoice at his son's survival.
Lucian maintains his posture of humble but firm repentance.
He asks Sigmund to offer fatherly encouragement rather than the cold judgment of a ruler.
A tense silence fills the sun-drenched office as the confrontation hangs in the air. Head butler Edwin is visibly shaken by the young master's sudden and eloquent change of heart.
Edwin observes Lucian from behind, sensing that the young man's aura has completely transformed.
He questions if this is truly the same boy who used to cower at everything.
Lucian shows a confident side profile, no longer looking like a neglected problem child. His heart hammers with a steady thud sounding as he maintains his convincing facade.
He remains composed and waiting under his father's piercing golden gaze. Internally, he celebrates his successful manipulation with a rapid thump sounding. Sigmund values the sudden spirit his son is showing, reminiscent of a wild dog.
He remarks that nearly dying has certainly made Lucian surprisingly brazen.
The Grand Duke agrees to listen to his son's earnest requests first.
Lucian recalls the legendary combat strength of his previous life as a mercenary.
He envisions a glowing holy blade ready to be unsheathed once more.
The image of a powerful red-haired commander on the battlefield fills his mind.
He focuses his resolve on reclaiming that lost power in this new body. When questioned about his interest in the sword, he admits he must first fix his physical frailty.
Lucian believes a simple regimen of food and rest will eventually restore his health.
Sigmund acknowledges that his son has become quite the eloquent talker. He decides to watch Lucian closely to see if his actions match his bold words.
The Duke prepares to leave the office with a soft chime sounding from the clock.
Edwin realizes that actions will be more useful than words in this house.
Lucian looks up with a sharp gaze, sensing the gravity of the butler's silent observation.
Edwin bows as his master orders him to process an immediate delivery with a deep bow sounding.
Lucian is left confused about what mysterious arrangement his father intended to send him. The estate exterior is lively with a busy bustle sounding of workers moving crates.
Strong laborers haul a massive wooden crate into the sunlight courtyard.
The chest is opened with a heavy metallic clatter sounding, revealing a hoard of gold and jewels.
Lucian stares at the ridiculous amount of treasure, realizing his life is about to change drastically.
Lucian stares at the massive delivery of gold. He sifts through the coins, marveling at the monthly allowance. Lucian laughs maniacally while planning to rebuild his frail body. Sigmund walks through a lush garden, accompanied by Edmund. Edwin notes the sentimental value of the late Duchess's favorite spot.
He observes the Duke returning here after a long absence.
Edwin attributes the change to Lucian's recent surprising behavior.
He reflects on the Duke's lingering attachment to his late life.
A series of steady footsteps sounding echoes as the Duke walks. Edwin recalls the timid version of Lucian he used to know. He remembers how easily the boy was terrified by raised voices. The butler acknowledges the boy's previous lack of resemblance to his mother. Sigmund's expression is unreadable as he moves through the conservatory.
Edwin is impressed by the resolute confidence Lucian showed earlier.
The butler defends Lucian as a thoughtful boy sharing the Duke's blood.
Sigmund remains skeptical about his son's true transformation.
The two men pause in the sunlit garden. Edwin prepares to deliver some concerning news to the master. He reports that someone is siphoning off Lucian's resumes funds.
A silver-haired man burns a letter with a menacing glare. Edwin describes a brother's blatant attempts to sabotage and control Lucian.
The Grand Duke listens to the report with a cold stare.
Sigmund forbids interference despite Edwin's concern for Lucian's progress.
A soft flowing trickle sounding of the garden pond punctuates the Duke's harsh judgment.
Sigmund views this struggle as a test of Lucian's worthiness.
He believes a true heir must overcome obstacles by their own strength. The grand mansion stands tall under a clear blue sky.
Hushed whispers fill the hall as maids gossip about Lucian's seclusion.
Hans stands guard outside the door with a fierce, determined gaze.
A sudden, sharp gasp sounding escapes him as he is startled.
Hans watches Lucian inspect the mountain of treasure they received. A brilliant sparkle from the gold and jewels fills the chest. Hans admires the courage Lucian showed in facing the Grand Duke. He feels a deep sense of respect for his young master's bravery.
Hans is moved to tears by Lucian's resolve to move forward.
Lucian continues to celebrate his newfound wealth with a devious grin.
He cackles with delight at his successful manipulation of the situation.
He reaffirms his goal to completely reconstruct his weak physical form. A rhythmic, soft bubbling sounding comes from the alchemy equipment in Lucian's room.
Lucian notes Hans's extreme loyalty while the boy stands guard. He reviews the complex diagrams and tools needed for his task. The mystical moongrass glows under the light of the full moon.
This rare and expensive herb is the key to Lucian's plan.
Lucian tasks Hans with acquiring a large quantity of the herb.
He realizes his sudden obsession with rare plants might seem insane.
His golden eyes sharpen with intense focus on the road ahead.
Lucian celebrates as his plan for the moongrass begins.
He lets out a boisterous laugh while anticipating his future power.
He contemplates the bravery of the alchemists who first used these methods.
Lucian acknowledges the high stakes and uncertainty of his experimental procedure.
A rhythmic tack-tack sounding comes from the pot as Lucian questions the massive amount of moongrass collected from across the empire.
The alchemist prepares for the gamble of a lifetime.
He attributes his progress to his own boldness while the vial opens with a sudden pop sounding. Lucian gazes at the unprecedented elixir that once shook the foundations of the empire. He uncaps the bottle to reveal a drug that others once considered arrogant to compare to the gods. He reflects on how the public eventually praised the substance once its incredible effects were revealed.
A confident smirk crosses his face as he lets out a sharp tisk sounding.
The alchemist presents a proposition that has remained unchallenged for a millennium.
He recalls the absolute law stating a warrior's potential is determined at the moment of birth.
Heavy chains symbolize the internal limits that no amount of struggle can normally overcome.
The legendary elixir known as nectar shines with a divine, otherworldly light.
He remembers how even those with zero talent were transformed into formidable swordsmen using the concoction.
A gentle slosh sounding comes from the vial as he admits his version is far weaker than the original nectar. He holds the pink liquid high, deciding it is perfect for repairing his broken physical form. Lucian looks down with golden eyes, telling the original host to consider himself lucky.
History shows that alchemists were targeted first during chaos because the recipe for nectar disrupted the world's balance. He looks at his reflection in the glass while explaining how he reconstructed the recipe from ancient clues.
He acknowledges the many who died from side effects but decides it is time to stop talking and act.
A gentle swish sounding in the water signals the start of the most critical part of his plan.
The word mana shines brightly over swirling blue ripples of pure energy.
He focuses on how spreading and retrieving mana can drastically change its quality and performance. Lucian uses the nectar to forcibly widen the blocked paths within his own body. He is suddenly confused by the unexpected situation he finds himself in after opening the paths. He marvels at the complete lack of pain that usually accompanies the acceptance of mana.
The energy shoots through him with a sharp shoe sounding as it finds its rightful place.
Lucian's golden eye narrows as he reflects on the impurities that typically block circulation even in infants. He finds himself submerged in a deep blue mana void, appearing focused and resolute.
A massive whale swims through the mana void as Lucian floats in the distance.
The sun begins to set over the peaceful, many-layered rooftops of the town. Lucian watches the horizon from a high window in the Golden Palace.
Outside the room, Hans paces with an anxious tap sounding from his boots.
He is startled by a sharp click sounding from the heavy doors.
Lucian emerges from the room with a low creak sounding and asks Hans if anything happened.
Hans rushes forward with a quick dash sounding to ask how long his master has been inside. Hans bursts into tears with a loud wah sounding because Lucian didn't answer his calls despite his orders. He continues to sob with a soft sniff sounding while explaining how terrified he was that something went wrong.
The orange-haired boy admits he was deeply worried about his master's safety.
Lucian offers a gentle, reassuring smile to his loyal servant.
Hans freezes in shock and calls out his master's name in confusion.
He thinks that while the boy is definitely the young master, something about him feels entirely different.
Lucian smirks to himself with a quiet tsk sounding, noting the boy's sharp intuition.
He realizes that Hans must have sensed the massive transformation taking place.
Lucian places a hand on his chest with a soft thump sounding, acknowledging his body still needs nutrition.
He looks at his own torso and admits there are no major external changes that.
Inside, his heart pulses with a heavy boom sounding as it changes at an unbelievable speed.
Lucian's yellow eyes glow with a new intensity and determination.
He looks down with a shadow over his face, certain that his plan is succeeding.
He stands like a giant king on a chessboard, destined to join the legends who changed the world.
Lucian lets out a sly hee-hee sounding while planning to surpass his previous mercenary prime within a year. Hans is left completely confused by the master's cryptic and confident words.
Lucian grabs Hans by the shoulders with a firm grip, reminding the boy that rewards and punishments must always be clearly defined.
He leans in with a sinister, wide-eyed grin and tells his servant to risk everything and invest all he has. The blonde boy cackles with delight while promising his loyal attendant a guaranteed smooth ascent to the very top.
Lucian strikes a dramatic, sparkling pose and declares his intention for them both to reach the skies together.
He reflects on his past experiences, amused by the fact that he never encountered nobles like himself in his previous life. A week passes in a peaceful forest as the scene shifts. Lucian and Hans walk along a dirt path through the sun-dappled woods.
The blonde noble whistles a casual tune as they continue their journey through the lush greenery.
Lucian leans back with his hands behind his head, marveling at how easy and refreshing his new life has become. He enjoys a luxurious lifestyle where maids clean his room and prepare his bedding without him lifting a single finger.
He compares this royal treatment to his previous life, where a daily routine of starving was his only reality.
Clenching his fists, he notes how this comfort has allowed him to focus on his recovery and address a lingering concern.
Lucian adjusts his tie while thinking about a specific matter that has been weighing heavily on his mind lately.
A crude sketch depicts a man named Jake who supposedly served as a guard for the Valdek family.
Lucian reveals that he checked with the captain of the guards and found no record of anyone matching that description.
He recalls visiting his old workplace while hooded, only to find a complete stranger occupying the shift he once held.
The boy decides this is for the best, as meeting his past self would be an embarrassing distraction he lacks the confidence for.
Hans watches from behind as his master stands still and trembles with an unreadable emotion.
The orange-haired servant calls out to his young master with a concerned and hesitant expression.
Hans nervously asks Lucian if he is truly planning on entering the building standing before them.
The servant reminds him of his previous hatred for the training grounds and his promise never to set foot there again.
Lucian looks genuinely confused by the claim, questioning if he ever actually said such a thing to the boy.
Hans explains that Lucian swore to stay away ever since the second young master treated him so poorly during training.
Lucian realizes the gravity of the past situation based solely on his servant's fearful reaction. He pieced together that his brother likely used swordsmanship practice as a cruel excuse to physically abuse him.
The blonde boy understands that the violence was a calculated move to instill deep-seated fear in the original Lucian.
He recognizes that it was a perfect strategy to ensure the timid boy would never return to the training hall.
Lucian gazes at the clear blue sky and reassures Hans that there is absolutely no reason for him to worry.
Hans looks at his master with a mix of surprise and lingering apprehension.
Lucian smirks as he enters the grand hall, finding the high-quality facility to be far beyond his initial expectations. The vast training interior is bustling with active guards and rows of equipment under a high vaulted ceiling. 2 guards confirm with each other that the third young master is indeed inspecting the hall with his servant.
A green-eyed man watches them, certain that the boy could not have forgotten the traumatic events of the past.
He smirks with a malicious glint in his eyes, planning to give the young master a harsh welcome upon his arrival.
Lucian is thoroughly impressed by the training hall, noting that it far exceeds even his most optimistic hopes.
He admires the abundant supply of spare weapons available for use without any concern for their durability. He surveys the massive open arena, perfect for practicing even the most intense and unrestricted physical movements.
A sudden visual blur signals the rapid approach of another person within the hall. Lucian is stunned to realize that a single individual has the wealth and power to own such a magnificent facility.
He somberly reflects on his past, wishing his previous companions could have trained in such a superior environment. A man with a mustache and goatee approaches the pair, commenting that his eyes weren't deceiving him after all.
The newcomer expresses mock surprise at seeing the third young master return to the training grounds.
He brings up the embarrassing memory of how Lucian fled in terror following a lesson with Lord Geordie a year ago.
The man mocks Lucian by comparing his past cowardly retreat to a helpless lamb being chased by a predatory wolf. He asks if Lucian is still so terrified that he felt the need to bring a servant into a hall meant for warriors. Hans looks down with a pained and frightened expression, clearly intimidated by the man's overbearing presence.
The man introduces himself as Hendrik and offers a mocking, humble greeting to the blonde boy.
Hendrik reminds Lucian that he was the one who personally instructed him and the second young master a year ago.
A dark memory surfaces of a bruised and tearful Lucian trembling while holding a heavy wooden training sword.
Hendrik laughs to himself while recalling the boy's past suffering, describing those sessions as a truly enjoyable time.
Lucian lets out a low ha sounding as he smirks with dark intent.
His yellow eyes glow with a predator's intensity as he flashes a fanged grin.
He reflects on the traditional image of a knight as the ultimate symbol of honor and loyalty.
He notes that nobles are groomed from childhood to master both martial arts and etiquette. Their worth is only proven after they have established merit through dangerous battlefield missions.
A knight's journey only concludes when they finally receive their title from their liege.
Lucian cynically views them as nothing more than hunting dogs wearing expensive collars.
He narrows his eyes while considering the true nature of their subservience.
A quick top sounding comes from his boot as he notes their duty to serve the ruling bloodline.
He's disgusted by the arrogant attitude Hendrik displays despite his lowly status.
Hendrik assumes that Lucian's weak standing within the family is what allows for this disrespect.
A sudden clank sounding comes from a glowing red chain representing the weight of authority.
He realizes that Hendrik is only acting out because he relies on a powerful backer.
Lucian's golden eye focuses sharply as he contemplates his next move.
He imagines a brutal scenario where he reforges the knight's mind through intense and painful training.
He acknowledges that the Grand Duke would never allow such a blatant display of violence. He understands that punishing a vital military asset without procedure would cause unnecessary internal friction.
He decides that it is not the right time to strike back to Raiwi.
Lucian declares his intention to visit the training hall often to learn the ancestral sword forms. Hendrik is confused by the young master's sudden desire to learn ancient techniques. The knight laughs mockingly, treating the boy's request as nothing more than a ridiculous joke. He informs Lucian that the time for learning has already passed since he is older than 15.
Hendrik explains that sword forms are secret techniques that grant enlightenment through movement.
He claims that these forms are the essence of wisdom meant to evolve the physical body.
He asserts that mastery is impossible because the path of mana closes at 16.
Hendrik dismisses the sword forms as a hollow shell that is nothing more than a dance.
He cruelly suggests that Lucian should give up and become the Empire's #1 dancer instead.
The other guards mockingly suggest the boy spent his time hardening.
Lucian stands in silence as a heavy and oppressive atmosphere fills the hall.
Hendrik gloats to himself, satisfied that he has left the young master speechless.
Lucian internally notes that the claim about mana paths closing at 16 is a blatant lie. He decides to feign ignorance for now to smooth over his long-term plan.
He compares the previous Lucian to a crying lamb held helpless by a superior force.
He reflects on how the boy was once a worm too terrified to stand up for himself.
Hendrik sees him as a pathetic creature that hasn't changed at all in the past year.
A sharp crack sounding comes from his knuckles as he questions Hendrik's flawed common sense. Lucian reveals the truth that the path of mana doesn't close until the age of 25.
He asks with mock concern if Lord Geordie also shares Hendrik's incorrect and dangerous view.
Hendrik smugly assumes that mentioning Geordie will force the boy into silence.
Lucian raises his hand with a sharp swish sounding as he begins his dramatic performance.
He places a hand on Hans's head and declares that the Valdek family is surely doomed.
Hans is terrified and confused as Lucian demands he agree with the dire assessment.
Lucian shouts in frustration that a knight could be so ignorant of basic common sense. He cries out that his vision is clouded by tears over the family's supposed crisis. Hendrik and Hans are bewildered by the young master's sudden and loud emotional outburst.
Lucian screams that a knight's ignorance is a shame to the family and a clear disaster.
He leans in with a terrifying grin, asking if Hendrik is intentionally trying to deceive his liege's son.
The group stands in the center of the vast hall as the tension reaches a breaking point. Hendrik panics and desperately tries to explain that he never intended to trick the young master.
Lucian mocks the idea that a noble knight would ever do something so petty and shameful.
Hendrik confirms the matter of course while Lucian realizes he was right all along.
Hendrik's eyes widen as he insists the matter cannot be overlooked lightly.
A warning highlights the consequences of wagging one's tongue the wrong way.
Lucian tells Hendrik that he clearly fails to understand the gravity of the situation. He notes that he would have overlooked simple humiliation, but this goes much further.
A sudden, sharp swish sounding accompanies Lucian's dramatic performance as he blames himself for forgetting his duties.
The boy puts on a show of mock sadness with tears and sparkles in his house.
He argues that providing incorrect knowledge hinders the recruitment of essential talent for the duchy.
He emphasizes that such ignorance threatens military power and the safety of the territory's people.
A quiet shimmer sounding surrounds Hans as he watches his master's intense performance with tearful worry.
A bright flare sounding highlights Lucian's piercing gaze as he focuses on his target. Lucian asks the trembling Hendrik if he finally understands the seriousness of his actions. A quick poke sounding hits Hendrik's chest as Lucian promises to report the matter to their father. He leans in with a dark expression, declaring he will demand an internal crackdown.
Hendrik panics internally, wondering how the boy who used to tremble at his name became so bold.
He recalls the previous Lucian being as frail and helpless as a baby lamb.
Hendrik perceives Lucian's presence as a massive predatory wolf looming over him in the darkness.
A sharp click sounding comes from a silver ring as a newcomer approaches the scene. The heavy clack-clack sounding of boots signals the arrival of a figure who asks about the commotion. Hendrik is horrified to see Lord Geordie and calls out to him in a panic. Lucian lets out a low huh sounding as he watches his brother's arrival with amusement. The second son of the Valdek family, Geordie Valdek, is formally introduced as a noble among nobles.
A cold whoosh-sounding wind seems to follow Geordie as he stands before the group.
A rapid patter-patter sounding of feet follows Hendrik as he rushes to explain the situation to Geordie. Hendrik desperately tries to justify the conflict to his master.
A sharp snap sounding comes from Geordie's hand as he commands the knight to stop speaking.
Geordie informs Hendrik that there is no need for him to explain anything further. Geordie whispers coldly that he witnessed the knight's disgraceful behavior firsthand. He expresses deep disappointment that a veteran was swayed by a mere child. Geordie warns the sweating knight not to put him in a more difficult position. The steady clack-clack sounding of Geordie's boots continues as he approaches the young master. Hans trembles with fear behind Lucian, convinced that the second young master is furious. Lucian lets out a quiet heh, sounding as he finds his brother's anger to be quite a sight. Geordie walks with an air of absolute authority befitting a successor of the Valdek name. The narrative notes that Geordie will not hesitate to overturn the board if he finds something useful.
Lucian puts on a pleasant smile and offers a greeting to his older brother.
Geordie looks down with a cold stare and asks if Lucian has been faring well during their time apart.
He demands to know what Lucian intends with his sudden and disruptive behavior.
Geordie reveals that he was watching everything that transpired between Lucian and Hendrik. Lucian gives a dismissive shrug, sounding as he questions the concept of damaged dignity. Geordie acknowledges that Hendrik made a mistake by using the second son's name to cause chaos.
He states he won't punish the knight because he values the bloodshed and loyalty to the family.
Geordie adds a biting insult, comparing the knight's worth directly against Lucian's lack thereof. A heavy top sounding lands on Lucian's chest as Geordie questions his right to blame a warrior.
Jordy commands Lucien to learn respect for the knights who serve the household.
He insists that the family's existence depends entirely on the strength of their martial forces.
A loud thud sounding accompanies Jordy's gesture toward the assembled guards as the foundation of the house. Jordy addresses the guards, apologizing for the commotion and dismissing it as the mistake of an immature child.
Jordy flashes a predatory, sharp-toothed huh, sounding as he mocks his younger brother.
Lucian maintains a calm smirk, internally noting how well his brother's manipulative mind works.
Lucian realizes Jordy is framing him as a knight insulter while cleverly maintaining his own reputation. Lucian gives a knowing smile, deciding to play along with his brother's deceptive game.
Jordy looks perturbed as Lucien mockingly acknowledges his brother's supposed wisdom.
Lucian sardonically invites Jordy to scold him for daring to insult his elder.
Lucian dramatically clutches his chest, putting on a grand show of false humility.
Hans is horrified by his master's reckless provocation, desperately wishing for him to stop.
Jordy's anger flares as Lucian continues his performance of mock reprete.
Lucian loudly proclaims that his brother's benevolence has provided him with a valuable lesson. The household staff watches in confusion as Lucien orders his brother's words recorded on silk.
Jordy watches Lucien walk away, a dark and predatory smile stretching across his face.
Lucian laughs maniacally, his eyes shining with a chaotic and triumphant energy.
Lucian requests permission to depart, ending the tense confrontation on his own terms.
Lucian notes that there is no reason for them to linger together any longer.
Jordy is consumed by rage, calling Lucien a fearless bastard as he tries to leave.
Close up on Lucian's cold, focused eye as Jordy questions his audacity.
Jordy mentions their father is watching, but Lucian reminds him who has nothing to lose.
Lucian dismissively says goodbye to Jordy and begins his exit with Hans.
Lucian and Hans run away from the confrontation as fast as their legs can carry them.
Hugo observes the retreat, questioning whether it was wise to let the brothers' conflict end so.
Jordy stands alone, his shadow lengthening as a dark aura of intense hatred surrounds him.
The Grand Manor stands bathed in sunlight, concealing the bitter sibling rivalry within.
Lucian and Hans walk down a peaceful dirt path, putting distance between themselves and Jordy.
Hans stops in his tracks, his voice trembling as he asks if things will really be okay. Hans expresses his deep fear of Jordy's vengeful nature and the likely consequences.
Hans breaks down in tears, convinced that Jordy will never let such an insult slide.
Lucian tells the distraught Hans to calm down while the servant wallows in his fear. A memory depicts a man suffering under a leader who ignores the consequences of his incompetence.
The man reflects on the misery caused when a superior feigns ignorance of their own failures.
Lucian smiles, assuring Hans that he understands how terrible such a situation feels.
Hans looks up hopefully as Lucian promises that no mere knight will ever dare harm him.
Lucian explains that the burden of a foolish master always falls heaviest on the subordinates.
Hans wipes away a tear, overwhelmed by the kindness and protection offered by his master.
Lucian looks out with a determined gaze, promising to be a leader worth following.
The sun shines through the trees, signaling a new era of trust between master and servant.
Lucian grips Hans's hand firmly, vowing that his people will never have to tremble in fear. The scene shifts as the afternoon sun gives way to a new chapter of events.
The magnificent facade of the Waldeck estate gleams under the bright morning sky.
Lucian and Hans walk through a grand sun-drenched hallway within the pass.
Lucian notes the suspicious silence that has followed the incident in the training hall.
Lucian remains wary, knowing Jordy is not the type to sit back after a defeat.
A sharp snap sounding echoes as Lucian grips a new piece of financial documentation.
Lucian's face contorts with sudden fury as he stares at the budget plan. Hans shouts with equal rage, agreeing that they cannot let this latest slight pass.
Lucian stands ready for conflict while Hans pledges his total support for their next move.
Lucian screams in outrage, realizing his allowance has been cruelly slashed.
Hans is equally horrified to find that his own salary has been targeted as well. A happy memory shows Lucian earlier that day joyfully receiving what he thought was good news.
Lucian recalls his excitement as he prepared to open the envelope and see his funds.
The memory captures Lucian's blissful smile as he looked forward to a life of ease.
Lucian freezes in pure disbelief as the true meager reality of the budget sinks in. Lucian looks down in confusion.
A crest highlights a budget summary.
Significant pay cuts affect the household. Jordy has interfered with the allowance. Lucian and Hans approach the doors. A quick click sounding marks his time.
Staff management shifted after his mother's death.
Dana was his longtime loyal supporter.
Jenny replaced her with a smug brain.
Jenny offers a mocking first greeting.
She introduces herself as the replacement. She notes his previous long isolation. She mockingly asks if his wandering ended.
Hans shouts in defense of his master.
Lucian tells his servant to stay calm.
He decides to skip the small talk.
He grips the budget plan tightly. He prepares to ask a direct question. He asks if she drafted the plan.
Jenny laughs and admits to the draft.
She claims she was only following orders.
She acts perplexed by his sudden interrogation.
She blames his past negligence for this.
Lucian knows she is using an excuse. He concedes that his past was difficult. Funds were used to raise servant salaries. He views it as a form of compensation. He questions the cut to Hans' pay.
She dismisses the cut as a mistake.
She claims her workload is too addy.
The other maids look on in fear.
They nervously confirm she is very busy.
Lucian decides to leave the room.
His staff remains loyal to Miss Rivals. He asks one final pointed question.
He questions her true choice of master. He intends to ask Geordie for answers.
They arrive at a dark, secret location.
Workers bet their salaries on brutal fights.
A heavy thud sounding follows the punch.
Lucian smiles under his dark hood.
He seeks a big catch share.
The bartender tells the kids to leave. He warns them to scram immediately. Lucian questions why they're being hicky. He demands to be treated as a customer. He hasn't dealt with Jenny yet. The chandeliers glow in the gambling den.
Jenny is protected by her childhood ties.
The chain of command is completely broken.
Lucian notes that since the current situation defies common sense, he must find an unconventional solution.
A man with dark purple hair stands with his back turned, looking out a window into the night.
He takes a sip from his glass, musing that resolving this confusion is part of a greater test.
Lucian settles into his seat at the table, determined to show his hidden hand. His attention is taken by a sudden, quick tap sounding as he sets the deck of cards down.
A rapid shuffle sounding fills the air as the cards are expertly handled.
Lucian flashes a confident smirk while holding an ace, plotting to make a fortune while he's at it. The table is covered in massive stacks of chips as the crowd begins a low murmur sounding.
Onlookers whisper in awe, questioning the young master's incredible talent and his opponent's sudden struggle.
The overwhelmed opponent stands up and admits defeat, unable to keep up with the boy's skill. Lucian offers a playful invitation to stay, punctuated by a quick click sounding of a chip.
Hans is completely frantic, shocked that his master has suddenly displayed such mastery of gambling.
Lucian leans back with a bored expression, asking if there are any other challengers left in the room. He casually tips over a tall stack of chips with a sharp clack sounding from his boot. A heavy bang sounding echoes through the hall as the large doors swing apart.
A steady clack sounding of footsteps follows as a man finishes buttoning his shirt while approaching the table.
The man offers a smooth greeting, apologizing for his late arrival to the scene.
A low thrum sounding accompanies the man's formal introduction as Hugo, the manager of the establishment.
The staff bows as they announce the gambling den will be closing early for the day.
Patrons are ushered out with the promise of generous treatment upon their next visit.
The manager views the closing as a small price to pay for what is to come.
Hugo flashes a predatory smile as Lucian notes the manager's sharp intuition and experience.
Lucian dismisses the apologies, claiming he only came seeking a brief change of pace.
Hugo comments on the size of the pot, noting he hasn't seen anyone win this much in quite some time.
He offers a polite challenge, asking if Lucian would mind him being his next opponent. Lucian is intrigued, questioning if the manager intends to play against him personally.
Hugo acts humble, claiming he has only picked up a few minor tricks during his career.
Hans begs his master to leave, terrified by the sheer amount of money already at stake.
The servant is visibly trembling, admitting he has a very bad feeling about the manager's intentions.
Hugo watches with a chilling, still gaze as his red eyes narrow.
Lucian realizes that Hans' instincts are quite sharp given his long time in the palace.
He looks at the manager with a cold, analytical eye.
Hugo maintains a friendly facade, though his expression feels carefully constructed.
A system notification introduces the man as Black Shark Hugo, a future ruler of the underworld.
A dark vision depicts Hugo as a man who rose through blood and brute strength alone.
He is shown leading an army of men as the undisputed king of the night.
In another lifetime, he declared himself a baron, sitting upon a throne of shadows and gold.
Lucian realizes that while Hugo is currently a rookie, he is already incredibly dangerous.
A vision of a massive shark being speared appears as Lucian declares his intent to catch this target.
They agree to a simple card game and decide there will be no limit on the betting.
Hugo laughs, claiming he wants to ensure the young lord remains thoroughly entertained.
Lucian is delighted, mockingly claiming he has finally found someone who understands him.
Hugo internally scoffs, viewing Lucian as a typical noble brat who relies on his family name.
He assumes their current deal will inevitably lead to the young master's total ruin.
Hugo thinks the timing of this encounter couldn't be any better for his plans.
He reflects that while his previous gambler losing wasn't planned, this outcome is better.
He views Lucian as a childish target who will only get more desperate the more he loses. A dark, predatory grin spreads across Hugo's face as he vows to devour the boy whole. Lucian puts on a dazed act, playfully asking if there is a problem with his focus today.
He smiles brightly while asking the manager one final question before the game officially begins.
Lucian smiles warmly, claiming he has developed a genuine interest in the manager.
Lucian suggests Hugo only survived because he didn't cross a line, while Hugo submissively insists he knows his place.
Lucian waves off the formality, noting that Housefall deck isn't as rigid as its reputation suggests.
A rhythmic shuffle sounding fills the room as Lucian asks when the secret production will officially begin.
Hugo maintains a confused expression, feigning ignorance regarding the young master's direct question.
Lucian narrows his eyes with a knowing look, specifically mentioning a hidden project located in Vestra.
The mention of an illegal hallucinogen hangs heavily in the air as the tension shifts.
The gambling hall falls into an eerie silence as the two men lock eyes across the table.
Lucian clarifies his point, stating that his focus is entirely on the distribution of illegal drugs.
Hugo stares down at his cards in silence, his confident facade beginning to crack under pressure.
Sweating, Hugo desperately claims he has no understanding of what a hallucinogen even is.
Lucian offers a mocking smile while questioning Hugo's secret commission by the Marquis Logren family.
The true objective is revealed, a plot to destabilize the Valdec family through illicit trade.
Lucian's gaze becomes sharp and predatory as he closes in on his target's deepest secrets.
Lucian scoffs at the Marquise's clumsy and cheap tactics, reminding Hugo that certain boundaries are sacred.
Lucian directly asks for Hugo's agreement while the manager trembles, unable to find an answer.
Lucian notes that Hugo's role in this conspiracy makes him a far more impressive figure than his masters.
Hugo feels isolated and trapped, the weight of a death sentence settling over his shoulders.
The reality of the situation is made clear. The Valdec family will ruthlessly hunt down everyone involved. An absolute threat of total eradication looms over every conspirator, with no exceptions granted.
Lucian observes that Hugo is trapped between the failure of his mission and the certainty of execution.
Lucian points to a Joker card, identifying it as the ultimate threat to the Valdec family's standing.
Lucian recalls a future where a raid on this base would have failed to capture the manager.
The memory depicts a grand hall in ruins after a failed attempt to seize the criminals.
In that previous lifetime, Hugo had successfully fled the city before justice could ever reach him.
Lucian muses that his past failures have granted him the foresight needed to change the outcome today. Hugo stammers that there must be a misunderstanding, but Lucian remains entirely unconvinced by the plea. The manager tries to play the victim, claiming he is merely a small shopkeeper making a modest living. Hugo loudly blames jealous rivals for spreading rumors, promising to find the source if given a chance.
Lucian exposes the lie by mentioning the specific rice mill serving as a front for the operation.
Lucian demands to know the current stage of the illegal operation with a cold, analytical eye.
Hugo is frozen in shock, his mind racing as his deepest secrets are systematically dismantled.
Hugo internally panics, realizing that all his secret passages and fake stores have been discovered. Hugo's hand begins to twitch as a desperate and violent instinct for survival takes hold. A dark thought crosses Hugo's mind as he weighs the possibility of a sudden assassination.
Hugo prepares to strike, believing he can kill the unprotected noble with a single, swift blow.
Lucian warns him to think carefully before acting while Hans trembles with fear behind his master.
Lucian informs him that the stakes of this gamble have shifted to Hugo's very life.
Hugo's hand freezes mid-reach as the terrifying gravity of his mistake finally sinks in.
Hugo mentally berates himself for even considering an attack on a scion of the powerful Valdec family.
A terrifying vision of torture convinces Hugo that a quick death would be a mercy compared to failure. Hugo collapses to his knees, consumed by a desperate need to find any way to save his life.
The manager begs for mercy, his previous arrogance completely replaced by total shivering fear.
Hugo realizes Lucian came seeking a personal arrangement rather than ordering an immediate execution.
Lucian smiles coldly, confirming that Hugo's life was spared only because he has a specific use for him.
Hugo pledges total loyalty, promising to crawl and bark like a dog if it means his survival.
The entire staff joins Hugo in prostrating themselves on the floor before their new young master.
A quick tap sounding follows as Lucian reaches toward a stack of gambling chips. Lucian focuses on the table, preparing to finalize the terms of their new coerced partnership. Lucian concludes that having a loyal dog to handle his dirty work will be an excellent asset.
Lucian accepts Hugo's pledge of service, noting he has a use for him.
A steady clack sounding follows Lucian as he walks across the wooden floor.
Lucian dismisses the idea of Hugo being a mere lackey, sensing greater ambition within him. Lucian reaches out with a quick tap sounding, placing a hand on the man's shoulder.
Hugo is stunned when Lucian offers him the chance to become a mate.
The manager remains frozen, unable to process the weight of the young master's words.
Hugo reflects on how he once desperately craved such a prestigious life.
A vision of his past reveals his immense skill and the many times he risked his life. Despite his efforts, he was always treated as nothing more than a tool for the nobility.
He recalls the bitterness of being cast aside despite his unwavering loyalty. A heavy thud sounding echoes as Hugo slams his head against the floor in a deep bow.
Shaking, Hugo asks if it is truly possible for someone like him to rise so high.
Lucian gives his word, swearing on the honor of the Waldeck family.
Lucian assures him that with true integrity, a person's low status is no obstacle. He makes a grand declaration, promising that merit will outweigh birthright under his command. Lucian offers a final encouraging look to his newest and most dangerous recruit.
Hugo looks up with newfound hope as Lucian invites him to live as a human being. The scene shifts to the sprawling and magnificent architecture of the Valdec estate.
Domestic staff whisper among themselves, curious about the sudden arrival of a new worker.
Lucian gathers the palace staff to introduce a formidable talent he recruited from the outside.
Lounging casually, Lucian commands the new recruit to introduce himself to the household.
Now dressed in warrior's garb, Hugo offers a sharp greeting to his new colleagues. The morning sun shines brightly into the grand room where the meeting is held.
The staff murmurs in shock, intimidated by the newcomer's intense and predatory aura.
A sharp crack sounding of Lucian's hands marks his demand to see the head maid immediately.
A nervous servant questions why the head maid is needed so suddenly for this introduction.
Lucian insists that the head maid should be present to properly welcome the new staff.
A memory reveals the head maid's arrogance and her habit of reporting every detail to others.
Lucian watches the staff with a cold eye, noting their predictable and defensive behavior.
The servants try to maintain order, terrified of any disruption to their current routine.
Lucian realizes the staff use him as a weak leader who won't last.
Quiet fills the office as ink and quills sit ready for the day's business. The head servant begs the young master to consider the precarious balance of the household.
He reminds Lucian that the second master, Geordie, has a special interest in the head maid. The maids join in the plea, desperate to avoid fanning the flames of internal conflict.
Hans listens in silent frustration, his jaw tightening as he hears his colleague's cowardice. Hans suddenly roars at the group, demanding they remember their true duties to the house.
He firmly reminds everyone that Lucian is the undisputed master of the estate.
Hugo watches as Hans declares that Geordie has no authority over their current master. Hugo offers a subtle smirk, asking the orange-haired servant to leave the situation to him.
Hugo suggests that Hans's noble words are wasted on people who only understand strength. Turning to Lucien, Hugo bows and confirms he knows exactly what must be done.
Hugo internally vows to drill loyalty into the staff through much harsher methods.
He warns Lucien that things might get violent and requests official permission to proceed.
Lucian is impressed by Hugo's sharp intuition, confirming his reasons for hiring the man.
Lucian reflects on how lucky it was that he intervened before the drug plot advanced further.
Lucian grants his permission with a light pat sounding on Hugo's shoulder.
Lucian tells his new enforcer to give the staff a show they will never forget.
A low hum sounding accompanies Hugo as he looms over the terrified head servant.
The servant trembles in fear, paralyzed by Hugo's massive size and murderous intent.
The head servant notes that Hugo looks even larger and more menacing up close. A nervous gulp sounding accompanies the servant's internal attempt to dismiss Hugo as a mere street thug. The servant warns Hugo that he is intervening without understanding the stakes and advises him to choose the winning side.
He questions if Hugo realizes Lord Geordie's cruelty and claims the advantage shifted to Geordie long ago.
Hugo's hand tightens into a fist as the servant asks if he would truly risk everything for mere pennies.
Looming over the man, Hugo dismisses his threats as pathetic last words. Disbelief washes over the servant's face as he realizes his intimidation attempt failed.
Hugo's fist connects with a blunt strike, cutting off the servant's confused protest.
The powerful blow sends the man reeling backward into midair.
The staff watches in horror as their colleague is launched through the hall while Lucien looks on with cool indifference.
Hugo stands firm, the impact of the strike echoing through the grand chamber.
A woman screams in terror at the violence, questioning Hugo's authority to act so boldly despite the young master's presence.
Hugo asserts that he has every right to proceed with his task.
With a predatory grin, Hugo explains that his specialty is disciplining those who have lost their way.
A quiet moment settles over a lone teacup resting on the table.
A rough drag sounding follows the bruised servant as he is unceremoniously hauled away. The man is dragged out of the room, leaving a trail across the ornate floors.
Two guards seize the red-haired head maid, who struggles and demands to be released immediately.
Jenny snarls at her captors, asking if they truly believe they can escape the consequences of this insult.
The guards command her to be silent and obey, asking if she fails to see the current reality of the house.
Jenny is forced through the doors, outraged that the lower staff would dare raise their voices at her.
The head maid is brought before the young master while the rest of the domestic staff kneels in submission. The servants nervously announce to Lucian that they have delivered the head maid, Jenny, according to his orders.
Lucian stands silhouetted against the bright window, his back to the room.
A soft swish sounding marks the moment Lucien begins to turn his head toward his visitor.
Lucian turns around and greets Jenny with a bright, welcoming smile.
He casually mentions that he had simply requested for the staff to bring her to him. Lucian remarks that his men may have been a bit too eager in their duties as Jenny glares at him with gritted teeth.
Jenny demands an explanation for the treatment, threatening that they won't get away with such a blatant offense.
She declares her lack of fear and insists that Lord Geordie will never let this treatment stand. Lucian mockingly suggests ending the matter there before questioning why anyone would think he is finished. A sharp snap sounding rings out as Lucian grips a whip, declaring that the real business is just beginning.
Disbelief and fear finally flicker in Jenny's eyes as she gazes at her master.
Lucian's expression turns deadly cold as he states that she will die right here today.